Welcome to the AmberMac Show. I am so excited to have Dwayne Matthews in studio with me. Dwayne is an education strategist. He's also a keynote speaker and my friend. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to start this off with a question that I got at an event recently. I know you spoke at the same event last year. And the question they asked me is, if you had an unlimited budget, unlimited time, what would you do in terms of ensuring that a school board was ready for this age of AI?
Wow, that's a really big question, and I think it's an interesting one. So, what I would do is I would really look at the function of what we're doing. So, if we go back at the very beginning, we had a technology called the printed book somewhere around 1871. And people realized that this technology has the ability to transform the world. So if you can imagine the world in 1871, 98% of the people are farmers, soldiers, or enslaved, and they're all working on a farm regardless of those positions. And so can you imagine walking and saying, hey, look, we're going to take your 5 children that are really strong and working on the farm, your daughter that can probably carry a sack of flour, 200 pounds for about a mile, we're going to put them into a small room with a blackboard at the front. What's a blackboard? It's this really cool technology, and they're going to learn how to read and write, and it will transform the world. And 100 years into the future, they will be sending messages, electronic mail messages, on beams of light and getting paid about $100,000. What do you think? It would have sounded absolutely crazy, but the function of what we were doing was realizing that the actual power of words will transform time and space. We are now in a reality where we have a number of emerging exponential technologies, and they are traveling at a linear progression, but now that we have artificial intelligence, it's applying exponential growth rate to each one, and they're converging. So that changes everything. It changes the economy, it changes what's possible, it changes our health. We start dabbling in things like longevity. So how do you start to prepare for that? Well, the first thing that I would do is I would go back and I would think about a few different areas to really focus on, a few different principles. And from those principles, then I would create the protocols. So the first principle is really developing the human side. How do you really specialize and develop that human side? Human ingenuity, human intuition, empathy, emotional intelligence, all of those things become really important. The next thing that I would focus on is mastering synergy between AI and humans. HI plus AI equals superpower. How do we put those things together, and how do we spend a lot of time getting students accustomed to the speed and the agility? Which leads me to the third thing, which would really be about resilience, mental and physical resilience. Currently in schools, we spend about 6 hours sitting, and it doesn't leave us physically resilient. And that was because of the limitation of the technology before, the printed book. We had to sit to read, right? But now that we don't necessarily have to sit to do everything, how would we change that mental resilience piece? The next would be future focused, and then the other would really be an entrepreneurial mindset, which is really thinking about what are the opportunities? And last, a really big focus on ethics. One of the non-obvious things about technology is that it provides us with an opportunity to expand our sense of humanity. And it always has done that. And we have a really big opportunity to expand, and we're going to need ethics to guide us.
Well, that is a phenomenal plan. I wish I had that answer when I was on stage, because I'm pretty sure I got fired from this hypothetical job very quickly. When you think about all of those things pieced together, you mentioned 5 or 6 different strategies. What is the limitation in terms of why we aren't seeing change to adopt some of those ideas? Because I think it is fair to say that people are aware of the changes that need to happen in education insofar as adapting to an AI world, but we're really slow to actually see any of those changes come into effect. What's happening there? You've been a teacher in the past, you've been a strategist in the education sector. Why are we not seeing change at the rate that we need to see it?
So, in many industries, you have an incumbent. And once an incumbent is formed, it's usually an innovation or a disruptive innovation model that's created. But once it becomes an incumbent, all the subsequent innovations are incremental and tactical because stability becomes really important. And that's ingrained over 200 years. You have that kind of stability in the education system. You're going to find it in larger industries. It might be print media. It might be, mobile. There's a mobile company in Canada that was disrupted. And so once you have that, you find that the disruptive models come from the edges. They typically come where people are excluded or they feel that they're behind a gate and they can't navigate around that gate. The actual incumbent itself, it's very, very difficult for an incumbent to disrupt itself because it typically will have to cannibalize itself. There is a way to do it, and few companies have been very successful, a few organizations have been very successful, but it's very difficult to do that because of stability. And once we're dealing with education, we're also dealing with our children. And so we don't want to have reckless experiments left and right. We may see some experiments that are reckless and it runs into problems down the road. So we really want to think about, can we be sure? Now, I believe that there is a model that will allow for sort of experimentation on that model and an expansion of the change. I think there's a way to do it, and I'm pretty excited about that possibility. But right now, how the system has been responding is understandable and expected.
I saw on LinkedIn just this morning, you post almost daily. It is kind of my go-to place to understand what's happening insofar as the future of education. You were talking about teachers specifically and what could be done to help teachers adapt to this AI world. And from what I understood, it was really about giving them dedicated time per week to dive into AI, to train on how to introduce it into the classroom. Can you talk a little bit about that piece? Because although we started with a very grand plan, sometimes it is nice to sort of chunk our time and think about something very specific in terms of how people can start.
Sure. What I wrote, and it's something that I thought about, is if I have a glass that holds 250 milliliters of water, it doesn't really matter if I'm dying to put 300 milliliters in that glass, it won't fit. It doesn't matter if I send the glass out for lessons, if I send it out for upskilling, there's only so much. Most teachers that are effective teachers, that are thoughtful teachers, which would probably be the majority of teachers that are out there, because it's not like they're making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Most teachers are up till 11:30, midnight, thinking about what they're going to do tomorrow. And they do that day in and day out. If you can imagine, when I was in grade 4, the math curriculum was just multiplication, right? Now it's probability. You have arithmetic. You have a whole bunch of different things, coding, computers. You have a whole bunch of different things. So the curriculum might have been this big, but now it's this big. And so the idea is, well, okay, there's one more thing that's really important. And at some point, we have to realize that if the 6-hour day was already full and we've added in another 12 hours, it's not going to fit. So I think what leaders need to do and policymakers need to do is really think about how can we provide more time. We have lots of research that supports that we don't have to have content being crammed in on 6 hours. We have lots of research that says movement is important for learning. We have lots of reality that says that there are other things that need to be learned. So I think that we could maybe have a day or two, a half a day, where teachers are focused on strategy and planning, and the students still come into the building, but there are other activities that are valuable. Intentional socialization, that's very important. A lot of people are like, the kids are not as socialized as they used to. I'm like, where did you learn to line up You learn to line up in school. I learned to brush my teeth at school, right? So if these things are important, we should make time for them. The content still remains important, but not as important. Being able to ask questions and being discerning is probably terribly important. You know, when I was a teacher, students and parents thought that because I was a teacher, I knew everything. And, you know, one of the things that I really focused on was academic humility and saying, Dwayne, you don't know everything. So you have to learn, you have to ask the right questions, curate them, and make sure that you are a couple of steps ahead. And that's actually going to make you more effective. So I think we need to find models to give teachers more time. We can do that. There are places in the world that do that, and there's research that supports how we can put that together and have it be very effective, particularly with AI and online tools.
When you think about AI and introducing AI into a classroom, one of the things that strikes me as sort of a difficult path right now is the reality, and we've seen this, I know in Florida, for example, there have been news headlines over the past few days that students' scores in some of the basics like math and reading, they have really fallen, especially out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm curious what you think about how do you continue to teach the basics, but also teach in this fast future when it comes to AI? Because it just feels to me like, does something have to give, or can you do those two things together?
Sure. So I think you can be very intentional. I think the problem is the idea of a false binary, thinking one or the other, and spending a significant amount of time having debates around that. You know, ChatGPT came out in 2022, and there's still long conversations about essays and AI detectors, which were the first conversations that came out in 2022. We're in 2025, and we're having the same conversations, and you know, we're fastly approaching strong AI, regardless of whether people believe in AGI or not, artificial general intelligence or anything else. We are fastly approaching strong AI, and we're still having the conversation. So I think what happens is we start to think about the model. The technology itself is disruptive, but that's not where the disruption is. When you find disruption is when you have a disruptive innovation model. And so how do you create the model? I'll give you an example. I have a daughter, and my daughter's quite young. And so we have an AI tutor that helps her with math. It's not an either or proposition. It's not she's going to the AI tutor and never going to paper and pencil. We have paper and pencil books. We have bonding time where she spends with her parents. It really is about finding the right model to give the right balance. And if we do that right, we can keep students in what's called a zone of proximal development, which is the right amount of challenge and the right amount of confidence or lack of challenge, having that balance and being able to move students along in that model. We find that we'll probably meet with a lot of success. The challenge, I don't think, is the AI or the students. The challenge is the conversation that we're having while time keeps on passing. And we haven't focused on future preparedness of these students so much as how do we deal with this new stuff.
I'm always amazed that we are spending so much time on AI detection tools, just to pick out one of the things you just mentioned. Although I'm sure that's important at some level, I think the reality is that every CEO, every leader in business, I certainly see all of them using AI, whether they're using ChatGPT to write an email or they're using other AI tools to be more productive. It is sort of bizarre to me that we assume that kids will enter a workforce of tomorrow that isn't AI focused, when we know that even today, all of the business leaders are using AI already. What do you think of that reality in terms of the fact that when we talk about preparedness, we really do have a long way to go?
Well, I mean, I'm super happy that you even mentioned CEO. One of the things that I can remember when I was a child was every adult asking me, teacher, parent, what are you going to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? And what they were really looking for was an answer that was some kind of profession. So a police officer, a teacher, a lawyer, a doctor, and I would pick one at random. I mean, I think I've told a few people how I became a teacher. I was standing in line at the registrar's office at university, very confused about what I was going to do. And my ex-girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was somebody that I really wanted to talk to again. And she just said, "What are you doing after school?" I said, "I don't know." She says, "I'm going into education. Here's one of the forms." That's how I became a teacher. It wasn't a deep-seated purpose that I found when I was 8 and thought, gosh, one thing I'm going to do. And I happen to like it and love it. And so I think what changes today is that today our kids are not going to be employees. They're going to be CEOs of Me Inc. And Me Inc., as a CEO, they're going to have the ability to hire 3 or 4 absolutely brilliant AI agents. And their job is going to be strategy, discernment, and direction, and creativity with those agents. What would I have them do as a CEO? So instead of thinking about, how do we prepare them to be a really good employee, we have to start thinking about how do we prepare them to be a really good CEO of Me Inc. Ethics, philosophy, influence, strategy, mental models, discipline. All these things become extremely important. And what do you do with all the cognitive surplus? I haven't met a CEO that does not read massive amounts of books. A lot of CEOs are very fit. How do they think about that extra surplus that they have when all of their staff is moving? This is the reality that our students face today.
So we've talked a little bit about what leaders in education should do. We've talked about what teachers should do. They are also leaders. Let's talk a little bit about what parents should do, because this is probably also one of the top questions that I get asked all the time is, what should I do as a parent to prepare my child for the workforce of tomorrow when it comes to AI? I certainly have lots of advice that I like to give parents, but one of the things I do see them struggle with is the fact that they put technology all into one bucket of bad. And that means, social media, AI tools, screen time. They think it's all just a bad thing. What is your opinion on that?
So the first thing that I would tell them to do is to reframe it. There's I forget the leader's name, but he talks about human technologicus, and talks about the fact that everything that we do is technology related, right? The printed book, many people forget, is 600-year-old technology. Writing is technology and innovation. Writing on paper is technology and innovation. The chairs that we're sitting on, and it allows us to do things that we wouldn't be able to do if we were running around in the jungles trying to catch things. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that one fact, and recognize that all of that technology falls into the background because we've created models that allow them to feel very natural. So we're going to have to create models that allow us to feel very natural about the convergence. AI is one of the really amazing things, but we have things like synthetic biology and all of these things that will start to tinker with longevity and how long we live. And so I think that would be the first thing, would be to think a little bit differently about the technology, and then think about the application as being right or wrong. And how do you do that? Not in terms of, how do you feel about it morally, but in terms of what is it that you would like to accomplish at the end. So for me, I have 2 children, and I think about this just about every night. And so my role as a parent is future preparedness. My role is to prepare them to meet the future. And so in the past, I would outsource some of that completely to school, right? I would think I need to give you lunch, and you need to go there and listen to the teacher. And that would be enough. So today I think, we have to start doing a few things extra. So one, the same advice, AI mastery of AI synergy. How do we start working on projects together? I would start to challenge my students or my children to work on projects. Create a website, right? What would be really hard that you couldn't do that you might be able to do, right? And can you go figure that out? The second is really to focus on how they ask questions, which is really important. We typically, as adults, we ask questions of children. You know, how was your day today? What do you feel? As opposed to helping them to think about what questions do you have and how do you create those questions. One of the things that we do with my daughter every night, we have 5 or 6 questions that we ask to Perplexity. And she says, explain it to me like I'm a 7-year-old. And she puts it in voice mode and she will do that. But every night, and what we want her to start really focusing us on is all of the questions that you have, how can you ask those? If you wanted to get daddy to say more, could you change the way that you ask the question? So now she's very, very thoughtful about, you know, what is and how might, right? And she'll ask me a how might question. How might it work if I were to use your iPad on the weekend, right? And so I think that's really important. And then the other piece is really physical and mental resilience. The ability to shift very quickly is going to be very, very important. The ability to look at a situation, see opportunities, see something changing, and respond to that is going to start to get very important. And then the last, I would say, is to be optimistic about what you can co-create with all of these new things. As the adults of yesterday, we naturally panic about what's coming, but they have the ability to think, if I were to make this world a better place, what would I do if I had all these tools at my disposal? They should spend a significant amount of time doing that. We've done a pretty decent job so far, but we could do better, and I think they're going to do much better than we are.
As always, fantastic advice for people who are watching or listening. Where is the best place for them to go to follow you online?
So the very best place is LinkedIn. Dwayne Matthews, OCT at LinkedIn. The second best place is I'm starting a community, and that community is going to start on Substack. So Dwayne Matthews at Substack, and the community is really about how will I prepare my students, my children, for the future. And so I spent a lot of time, I spent the last year sort of writing a lot of this stuff down, and I thought this would be great to share with people. My son will be 25 in 2035, and my daughter will be 25 in 2043. So I've thought about what might the world look like, and if it's kind of fuzzy, how would I help them to get there? And so I'm going to start that at that community on Substack. But those are the 2 best places to find me. And if you're just looking for some random pictures, Instagram.
Well, listen, thank you so much for sitting down with me once again and joining me on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.